I've always wondered who was behind the costumes. I was unfortunate enough to find out when I took my son on his first trip to Disney World. Being a single father isn't easy. I work as hard as I can to provide for my child, but I need to make enough free time to be there for him. It's a rough balance that I and many others struggle to maintain. So rare that I get a chance to spend the entire day with my boy, or that I get a break from the stress. So when an opportunity arises, I take my best to make it a reality. So when my son David happened to come across a contest that boasted the chance to win a family package to Disney World, I set my sights on making it happen. His glee while he filled in the necessary information was almost enough to make my heart melt on its own. I wasn't naive. Things like that don't happen to us. After losing our eye, I learned that you can't count on things to work out for you. After David submitted his form, I started to scour my work schedule for any openings that I could take and still be there to provide. Early mornings got earlier and my workload increased tenfold, but it would be all worth it. That's what I thought anyway. The contest ran for a month and a half to give people time to send in their entries, and me time to save up for 2 tickets. I stayed up on a night that I had free and printed a mock-up letter stating that David had won the contest, stuffed it inside a white envelope and placed it ever so gently inside our rusty mailbox. Then all I had to do was wait for him to come home. And when I tell you that this boy's whole world lit up, like the 4th of July, and he opened that letter, then, man, I hope I never forget his smile. Thought he was gonna damn near rip his cheek open, grinning that hard. We set a date, one where I could get the 3 days off work I needed. Even though the trip was still a few weeks away, David was all packed and ready to go the night he received the letter. He told me all about how jealous his friends were. Never even questioned why the family pack only consisted of 2 tickets. I can't speak for all parents, but Disney World was miserable. It was far too hot, and within a few minutes of walking around in the unrelenting sun, I could feel my sweat clinging to my clothes. David wanted to see every bit of the park that he could. He would run up to every mascot. I could tell he was getting flustered with the ones that couldn't talk back. I could tell it was going to be a problem. I love this boy, but he isn't great at letting things go. I guess most children are like that. The park was so loud, my feet started to hurt as we stood for unreal amounts of time in line for one ride at a time. I wasn't there for me, though. I was there to spend time with David and watch him immerse himself in all his favorite movies. Still, though, despite me trying to explain the mascot's silence, he continued to protest. I would have to walk up and pull him away from the silent animals. Once David reached forward and grabbed onto Goofy's hand, the expression on David's face dropped, and he walked back to me. His hand felt weird, he said to me. I looked up at Goofy. I didn't care. They could be as animated as they wanted to, but the unmoving face always gave me the creeps. The way they could just stare forever, you know. I didn't engage with many after David got creeped out, and I couldn't really get an explanation out of him. We still had far too many things to see anyway. We couldn't be stopped to talk to each and every make-believe character. David's mood slowly returned as we feasted on a monstrously expensive meal and went on a few more rides. We sat together as the sun had long since passed the horizon and watched the fireworks leap into the air. The brilliant spectacle of colors and booms filled the park, and despite all of my complaints, there with my boy, it truly was the happiest place on earth. It would have been picture perfect if it wasn't for all the mascots that stood around us. With every glow of the various colors, their features were outlined. Then they'd fade into the dark. It was eerie, and I was glad David hadn't gotten scared. Once the grand finale sent a seamlessly endless stream of fireworks cascading into the sky, filling it with bright, sparkling lights, I noticed that the mascots had left. Then the fireworks ceased, and our only lights were the sparsely placed lamps around the park. And after a bit more time of walking around, it was time for us to leave. David said he needed to use the bathroom, so we started our search, but the crowd was flowing like a river towards the exits. I was bumped on my shoulder and turned to face a man who gave me a quick, apologetic glance. That was all it took for David's hand to slip loose from mine. Looking back, I noticed I was alone, my head frantically swiveling, searching the crowd. My voice raised above the surrounding chatter as best as it could to call his name, and when I didn't have a reply, I started pushing against the tide. My exhausted body brushed up against an ocean of others as I tried to find a clearing, hoping the herd would thin out. My breath and my heart started to race in tandem as seconds felt like an eternity. Getting near the back of the pack, I could hear a distant and timid, "Hello?" swimming under the conversation around me. David. It was David. I looked around like a madman, and once only a few people were surrounding me, I could see under one of the lights was none other than Mickey Mouse. Of course, I thought. Of course. David would want to say goodbye to Mickey if he saw him. With the crowd dissipated, I quickly jogged to the oversized rodent and noticed that David had a small collection of tears under his eyes. I promptly asked him what was wrong, and he said that Mickey won't say goodbye to him. The last thing I wanted was for David's final memory of the park to be a negative one. All he wanted was a goodbye. I stood straight, looked the mouse in his saucer-sized black pupils, then back to my son who was wiping his cheeks. Slowly, I stepped forward and leaned in towards the mouse's ear and did my best to keep a whisper so my son couldn't hear. "Hey, I know you're not supposed to. Even if it's the worst impression, please just say goodbye." There was a moment of silence, and when I didn't receive a response, I started to pull away from Mickey. "Dad?" David chimed in, and when I turned my head, I noticed that Goofy had closed in on us. Looking back to Mickey in the dark, when I stared into his pupils, it seemed like the dark they were made of was swirling. I told David that we should just get going. He said he wanted a goodbye. And he grabbed Mickey's hand. Mickey grabbed back. The grip must have been strong, as David immediately started to struggle against it and scream for me. "What the hell?" I shouted towards the rat. I reached out to grab Mickey's arm, and when my hands made contact, I understood David's previous statement. Weird was the only word I could come up with, too. Whatever was under the costume was much skinnier than a person should be. The mask I grabbed onto felt like it was constantly shifting around under my hands. I wanted to leave the park, but I also wanted to give my son fond memories of it. I didn't want things to get physical. I turned to look at David, but instead of being able to focus on calming him down, I noticed Goofy was walking closer to us. The illumination above us cast completely on the front of Goofy, and the costume's fabric was writhing. Like hundreds of fingers were under the costume, all pressing on the inside of it. That was enough. I just buy the kid some damn ice cream and be on the way home. Hey, let go, or I'm gonna hit you, I warned. I was tired, but the thing under my hand didn't feel like it had any muscle to speak of, yet it continued its dead gaze into my eyes. David's cries echoed in my head. I reeled back, and I threw a punch towards the cartoon head. I thought that it had come completely off, but it was just hanging off its shoulder, held together by thin black string. A string that was moving, trying to pull the head back into place. Mickey's grip loosened and David was able to wriggle free, but me, I could feel two light brown arms wrapping around me. "Run to the exit, David!" I exclaimed as I wrestled against the dog, trying to hold me in place. "That's enough," a sweet voice commanded, and in response, Goofy pulled away from me. I adjusted my gaze to the female voice that saved me. "Sorry, nighttime is feeding time," she spoke. I was beside myself as I looked into the face of Sleeping Beauty. The actor stood under the lamp across the path with her hands clasped together. Mickey and Goofy stepped away from us. Mickey, now with his head back on his shoulders, stepped into the shadow. Sleeping Beauty walked forward with an unwavering smile. "We have to take care of our young, don't we?" she spoke, looking at David, but clearly addressing me. "What's your name, little guy?" David looked at me and back at Sleeping Beauty. "David," he whispered. Sleeping Beauty lowered herself to David's eye level and gave him a nice, toothy smile. "Goodbye, David," she spoke, soft and kind, with one of her hands reaching out to hold David's hand. "And good night." Raising back up to meet my stare, she continued her almost inhuman smile. "You're going to want to get that off you." She pointed at my arm. There was what I first thought to be a strand of hair resting on my bare arm. What I thought was hair then spread out and seemed to multiply until it was a scraggly clump of thin strands reaching around. I felt a small prick as a number of the strands seemed to try and wriggle their way into my pores. Quickly, I raised my other hand and grabbed the mass. As I pried it from my arm, the strands continued to brace into my skin. With enough effort, the tendrils were snapped loose, and I chucked the mass to the ground before it latched onto my hand. The clump moved across the tiled road until it found Sleeping Beauty, who bent over and let it rest on her gloved hands. She nodded, and with that, I grabbed David's hand and once more pulled him towards the exit. His tears were gone, and all that was left was a satisfied grin. I offered one more look back as we got to the exit. They were all there. Each mascot we had come across that day stood in the dark, watching us leave. Our drive home was long. Quick for David, though. He passed out in the passenger seat, clutching one of the souvenirs that he had purchased. I tried to get the images out of my head on the ride home. Each stray strand of hair in the car sending me into a mild panic until the wind pouring in from the windows whisked it away. I think what was most disturbing to me, even as horrific as the fur mascots were, being held together by whatever the hell was inside there, was Sleeping Beauty. Her calm and collected attitude, and most unnerving, when she flashed that toothy grin to my son. The light above us perfectly bounced off those pearly whites, and the black strands that were poking out from the small gaps of her teeth. David never brought it up, despite me asking if there was anything that he wanted to talk about, and he only reminisces about the positive experiences of that day. I'm not sure if we'll ever go back. But if we do, we'll be sure to leave before closing time. Hey there kids, it's me, MrCreepyPasta, and I just wanted to take a quick second to say thank you for listening to tonight's video, and quite potentially tomorrow night's or last night's video, depending on how many times I've reused this recording. I especially want to give a big thanks to Erik Mary, John, Daniel Poulsen, Trace Miles, Jordan Alexander Sanchez, Wayne Milstead, Frederick LaRue, Ken LAndo Higuchi, Brianna Van Tine-Janzen, Nicholas Saeid Alyain, Tyler Ramberg, Asia, Gabrielle baca, TheRedOakShieldVirus, Sandy Barney, Melissa Siegwart, Chompski, Daniel Rowe, TheGingerBroz, Andreas Solvik, and Andrew Steinberg. You guys and everybody who is supporting on Patreon are the real MVPs. And if anyone would like to join them, you can always check me out at patreon.com/MrCreepyPasta. Or if you'd just like to support the show without, Patreon, then honestly, every view or minute or however you watch or listen to this Creepypasta Storytime on the YouTube live stream or here on YouTube, the podcast on Amazon, Google Play, and on Spotify. And if you'd like to support my wife, then there's nothing better than listening to scary stories with some Dungeons & Dragons themed herbal teas. Etsy.com/ ivory monocle tea. Alright, kids. Thanks so much for listening, and sweet dreams.